Lina, thanks so much for being here today. I feel like we have to start with Steve Bannon saying that he thinks you're one of the most important political thinkers in the country right now, and even suggesting that he thinks you should be reinstated as chair of the FTC. I mean, you spoke at our inaugural event last year alongside then Senator J.D. Vance, who said that you were his favorite member of the Biden administration. And obviously, the political landscape has shifted slightly, but during the campaign, you had Harris advisors like Reid Hoffman and Mark Cuban publicly advocating your removal. I'm curious about your perspective on this contrast. You seem to occupy a kind of unique political position. And then more specifically, whose worldview on anti-monopolies is closer to your own? Vice President Vance or former Vice President Harris?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. It's a great question for them. I think it is really thrilling and fascinating to see that in a fairly organic way, we are seeing people across markets, across the political spectrum, come to the recognition that, it probably isn't a great idea to have our economy be centrally planned by monopolists. And that having markets where incumbents are squashing out innovators, where entrenched monopolists are pulling up the ladder behind them, really hurts us. It hurts us as consumers, it hurts entrepreneurs, it hurts startups. It means that our markets are more stagnant and less dynamic. And I think there is traditionally been a deep understanding that extreme concentrations of power pose a threat to our core liberties, be that power that's concentrated in the government in ways that is unchecked, or power that is concentrated in a monopolist or a very small number of companies. And so I think we've seen a lot of progress in the last few years in terms of reinvigorating our tools to take on that unchecked power, but of course there's a lot more work to do.
So Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson have a new book out that's kind of been making waves, Abundance. And they make the point, I think their central thesis is basically that Democrats need to kind of focus on regulations and red tape as kind of the primary obstacles to unleashing, affordable supplies of things like housing. I guess, first of all, do you agree with their premise that government red tape should be high on the list of problems for Democrats specifically to focus on? And if so, sort of, how does that relate to the challenge of corporate power in your mind?
Yeah, so big caveat, I have not yet read the book. I was hoping to pick it up at the airport on my way home. I think as a general matter, one of the biggest obstacles that I heard about at the FTC from entrepreneurs and startups was bureaucratic red tape that was created by monopolists and that was created by incumbents that were unchecked in the market. I had the chance to not just speak at the event you all did the last few years, but also sit down with a lot of entrepreneurs and startups and people who are trying to get their app to market, and just heard about all of this frustration they had trying to navigate these rules set by these private gatekeepers. And so I think any analysis that's trying to honestly and candidly figure out what are the obstacles to progress and where do we see those bottlenecks really does need to grapple with the role of private bottlenecks that are across markets. I understand that the book seems to be very focused on some problems that are specific to San Francisco. And so, I think we should be wary about extrapolating that beyond that to the whole country. But even if you're thinking about things like housing, at the FTC, we saw markets that were monopolized, including in areas like cement, where you had, local building efforts that were really thwarted by some of those efforts to, make sure materials were actually affordable. So I think those are all challenges that we really need to grapple with.
Several people today have talked about President Trump's removal of Commissioners Slaughter and Bedoya from the FTC. Obviously, these are being contested in court right now, but I'm curious about your perspective on the intervention and sort of what implications it might have for the Commission's autonomy going forward.
Yeah, these firings were clearly illegal. There's very clear law in the books that says FTC commissioners can only be removed for cause. There was no cause even alleged here. And I think just more generally, you can have an academic debate about what the law is and what the implications are for presidential power. What's been most disturbing to me is seeing already the ramifications on the work itself. Just this week, we saw that one of the cases we had filed last year against the 3 big PBMs, alleging that they had engaged in illegal tactics that are inflating the costs of insulin and other drugs, that lawsuit has now been put on pause indefinitely as a direct result of these firings. So, I worry about what impact it's going to have on the work. We've all been seeing the big tech CEOs in particular make pilgrimages to the White House, to Mar-a-Lago. These individuals and their companies are currently defendants in litigation brought by the government. So, of course, there's also a question about what it's going to mean there. Is there a higher risk of some of these companies getting sweetheart deals and cheap settlements? So, I think this is an area that we're going to have to be very vigilant about. I think more broadly, we have seen significant bipartisan alignment when it comes to taking on unchecked corporate power, especially when it comes to technology markets. And I do worry that this really strains that, and hope to see my colleagues reinstated quickly.
Do you sort of generally have any thoughts about how we can facilitate more bipartisan alignment on these issues, or sort of like what the future of this nascent coalition might look like?
Yeah, to my mind, the bipartisanship here stems from the fact that the problem of unchecked monopoly power is one that affects people across all walks of life, across all parts of the country. I got to do trips to places like Ames, Iowa, and sit down with farmers who would share how extreme consolidation across agriculture markets was making it difficult for them to keep their farm operation afloat, how restrictive repair policies were making it difficult for them to repair their own equipment in a timely way. Would meet with people in Silicon Valley, hearing very similar concerns about private gatekeepers there. And so I think the more that we engage with the facts and what's actually happening in markets, I think that creates a real organic way to recognize that people, again, across the country, across political affiliations, are increasingly recognizing how extreme concentration of power in markets poses a real threat.
So after the launch of DeepSeek R1, you wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and you said, quote, "DeepSeek is the canary in the coal mine. It's warning us that when there isn't enough competition, our tech industry grows vulnerable to its Chinese rivals, threatening US geopolitical power in the 21st century." And you joined us at YC last July to talk about the importance of open source foundation models, and this was when SB 1047 was being debated, Senator Scott Wiener's AI safety bill. I'm curious, sort of, given your perspective on open source AI, how do you view the role that dominant gatekeepers like Apple and Google might be playing in shaping consumer access to AI technology?
I think it's troubling, and if history is any guide, then we should worry that these gatekeepers and the self-interest that they have could mean that people are going to be deprived of cutting-edge AI technologies and tools that could really improve people's lives, but that may not be aligned with the interests of the gatekeepers. I thought that the testimony that Gary Tan gave yesterday and some of the examples he gave around Siri were quite compelling around, why do we see such a lag here in terms of the technological sophistication? And so I think it's a real concern. And when I was at the FTC, we made an effort to make sure we were really promoting open APIs, focusing on things like open weights in models, and recognizing the ways that historically openness has been such an important catalyst for turbocharging innovation and making sure that entrepreneurs are able to really focus on innovating in the areas where they have the most value to add, rather than kind of making the infrastructure be a basic obstacle and entry barrier. So I hope that those are principles that we can kind of continue to pursue in the AI space as well.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of interesting. Some people have pointed out the kind of apparent contradiction of a country like China being at the forefront in many ways of open source AI, while the US, obviously we have many sort of closed source models. What do you make of that kind of apparent, contradiction or difference just sort of between the two models?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. And look, I think we need to double down on the historical approach that America has taken, which has been to make sure that we are keeping our markets open and competitive rather than opting for a centrally planned economy that really doesn't necessarily reward good ideas and allow the best ideas to rise to the top. Friedrich Hayek wrote this famous essay about the comparative advantages that a free market system has over a centrally planned economy. And he noted, for example, that the pricing system is one that allows dispersed information and dispersed knowledge to be communicated in ways that in a centrally planned system you're never going to be able to replicate because no one entity kind of knows everything. And one of my concerns is that when you have these behemoths, these like huge entities that are just spanning all of these markets, you really actually see the breakdown of some of these basic free market tenets, where basic information that would be communicated effectively and efficiently in a free market system just totally gets distorted. And so I worry a lot about those distortions. We obviously have a whole set of antitrust cases that are currently pending, including one against Facebook at the FTC that is set to go to trial in the coming weeks. It'll be really important that we see these litigations through, that we get good remedies. One thing that I continue to worry about is the way that the glacial pace of antitrust litigation can mean that the remedy, really needs to be forward-looking so that we are not just fixing the problems of yesterday, but actually making sure that the problems are not being replicated in these new markets. And so I think that's going to be a really important principle. It's a principle that kind of exists in the law, and we've seen that some of the most effective antitrust remedies in the past have really been future-proofed in that way. But I think it's going to be really important for government agencies to be making that case to the court, and then for judges to really make sure that we're not effectively allowing the monopolists to benefit and profit from years of law breaking and then just pay a fine, a decade later, or even, make certain changes to their business that are just affecting old markets, even as they're just replicating those strategy in places like AI. So I think that's going to be an area to stay very focused on.
I want to actually see if there's any questions from the audience. I think no one has yet done this, but if we have one or two questions from the crowd, I think it might be interesting to incorporate those. I guess I see a hand in the back, yeah.
Lina, what's your take on the announcement of Amazon buying TikTok?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Amazon buying TikTok.
I have not seen that announcement. It'll make for an interesting challenge and question for our antitrust agencies.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Maybe this isn't entirely your space, but I think for newer companies this matters a lot. Can you share your impressions about copyright law, and in particular how defining that today is going to determine whether any small companies can compete with some of these larger companies?
You mean in the context of AI or just generally? Yeah, I mean, this is literally $1 trillion question right now in terms of what some of these larger firms that have been able to build their models are able to do. When I was at the FTC, we heard a lot from people who create for a living, be it authors, be it graphic designers, who were really alarmed that one day they woke up and saw that their life's creation had just been ingested by these models, and they seemed to have no recourse. And suddenly these models were spitting out, sometimes text, sometimes images that were competing with their own products and had been fed by their own products. And so I do think that there is a basic question of fairness here. This is also an issue that's being litigated in the courts. There are kind of a few very prominent cases, including one brought by the New York Times. There was actually just a recent decision, I believe, in the Third Circuit, basically allowing one of these copyright cases to proceed. And so it's a very timely question. I do think that just at a basic level of not just fairness, but innovation, if we allow an ecosystem to appropriate value from creators without actually adequately compensating them or really getting their consent, I worry that that is going to dampen innovation in the long term. Because what are going to be the incentives to actually create in the first place if you're not going to be able to reap the rewards when those creations and those investments actually take off? And so I do worry that beyond the kind of basic fairness implications, there are going to be major questions here about whether creators are even going to have the incentive to invest in creations and whether we're going to see stagnation in that area if we don't get the market questions right.
Hi, I'm Daniela Cheslow with Politico, and I was hoping you could respond to two news developments out today. One is a report in the Financial Times that the EU might limit the fines that it imposes on Meta and Apple, and the second one was reports that Mark Zuckerberg was in the White House today, days before his FTC case goes to the court again. What do you make of those two developments?
Yeah, I mean, on the first, I'll defer to folks in Europe to kind of weigh in on what the intricacies are there. On the second, I mean, I do think that it's fairly troubling to see a executive that's heading up a company that's a defendant in a major lawsuit be able to have such easy access. And I think it just does raise questions about are there going to be certain benefits or value that is conferred as a result of that access? This is kind of the kind of iconic concern that the founders had about why you need to create checks and balances. And one of the reasons we have our anti-monopoly laws was to make sure we were safeguarding our government and safeguarding our political system from outsized economic power that could then be used for political ends. And so I think we are all watching those risks and threats in real time, and it's going to be a major test of the system to see if we can withstand that.
Kind of closing out this conversation, are you going to primary Chuck Schumer? but what is next for you now that you are for now in the private sector?
No, I admire people who do electoral politics, but it's not something that I personally have a deep desire to do. I think there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm, especially among young people, to figure out, what is the next phase of all of this look like, and what does it mean to keep building out this anti-monopoly movement. And so that's what I'm going to be focused on.
Do you have a final message to the kind of the founders in the audience who are sort of wondering, what this stuff sort of means for them, the builders?
Yeah, I mean, I know DC can sometimes seem like this foreign land or even a different planet. I'll just say your engagement really matters. When I had the privilege of being FTC chair, I really prioritized hearing from real market participants and was always struck by just how much you learn from people on the ground who are kind of dealing with these market realities day in, day out, and it makes it so that our work is more effective and more directly responsive to the actual challenges out there. And so I would just encourage people to keep engaging with policymakers, with elected officials, because it's incredibly important.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Lina.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.